This is CNN Breaking News.
Good afternoon. I'm Jake Tapper, live in Washington. I want to welcome viewers here in the United States and around the world. This is CNN special live coverage of the breaking news that President Trump has decided to withdraw from the landmark international climate change agreement, an agreement that most every country on earth has signed up for. 147 countries have ratified the agreement, but now the U.S. joins Syria and Nicaragua, the only other countries that have rejected it. You're looking at live pictures right now from the Rose Garden of the White House, where any minute now we're expecting President Trump to come out and speak and discuss his official decision. Of course, this decision might come as very little surprise for anyone who was reading the president's Twitter account back in 2012 when he called climate change a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese, which of course it's not. The goal of the Paris Agreement is to get the world to, quote, undertake ambitious efforts to combat climate change and adapt to its effects with enhanced support to assist developing countries to do so, unquote. The United States is historically, cumulatively, the biggest contributor of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, though currently China is the biggest carbon polluter at twice the rate of the United States. Many of the biggest businesses on earth, Google, Facebook, Apple, BP, others, just to name a few, argue that leaving the Paris Accord is not only the wrong decision for the environment, but that it will mean fewer jobs in the U.S., but the Trump administration insists that staying in the agreement will hinder job creation, and he has expressed to advisors that he's especially concerned about job creation in blue-collar regions in the United States, ones that rely on manufacturing, ones that traditionally rely on fossil fuels, where some of his strongest, most ardent supporters live. Let's go live now to Jim Acosta, who is CNN's senior White House correspondent. Jim, what are you learning about the decision?
Jake, from what we understand, the White House has informed members of Congress, their staffs, that the president does plan on pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement. We'll be hearing that here shortly here in the Rose Garden. We're also hearing in the last few minutes, Jake, that the White House also held a conference call with conservative groups to lay out some of the talking points that the White House will be using over the coming days. I've got some of these talking points in front of me. Not surprisingly, as you mentioned, the president is expected to say, and they'll be saying over the coming days, that the Paris Agreement was just bad for business, and that's what this talking point says here. It says the Paris Accord is a bad deal for Americans, and the president's action today is keeping his campaign promise to put American workers first. The accord was negotiated poorly by the Obama administration and signed out of desperation. These talking points say it front loads costs on the American people to the detriment of our economy and job growth while extracting meaningless commitments from the world's top global emitters like China. Interesting, Jake, on a couple of fronts in that they're trying to frame this as an economic decision that the president is making after all those years of tweets and statements from the president that climate change is a hoax and so on. Jake, nowhere is it mentioned in these talking points that climate change is not happening. So the White House, by omission, appears to be acknowledging that climate change is happening, that human activity is contributing to climate change, although it doesn't state that very much here. It talks about how carbon emissions have been reduced already by the U.S., and it cast doubt on what the commitments might be like from China and other big polluters in terms of bringing climate change under control. And of course, we know the scientific community and even companies like ExxonMobil and BP are all convinced that climate change is happening. So anybody who would say otherwise, might be might be full of kofifi or something, Jake. But in the meantime, we are hearing from the White House that yes, the president does intend to fulfill a campaign promise. And I talked to a source close to the White House that this is exactly a part of the president's calculus, that there have been a few occasions, obviously, over the last several months of this administration where the president hasn't kept his campaign promises, hasn't pulled out of NAFTA, didn't label China a currency manipulator. He didn't move the embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, and so on and so on. And so this is an opportunity, they feel, where the president can do that and not damage his standing politically among conservatives. But of course, you're going to hear a lot of people around the world, Jake, in the coming days saying this is very damaging to the planet. The president of the United States is the leader of the free world. The United States is the leader of the free world, and the leader of the free world is pulling out of a historic climate agreement. Jake.
All right, Jim, thank you so much. Stand by there. We'll go back to you. I want to bring in Mark Preston, who is CNN's senior political analyst. And Mark, what are the real-world consequences of the deal?
Well, there's a couple lines that we should look at right now. We should first look scientifically now. Both you and Jim noted that China is the worst emitter of carbon dioxide worldwide. Number two, the United States. And with the U.S. pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, scientists are in agreement, or a majority of them anyway, that we are going to see temperatures rise. Let's first look scientifically what that means. Well, rising seas. We could see the seas continue to rise, and we could see flooding in major cities such as New York City to Shanghai. Deadlier heat waves would be more abundant. We'd see droughts, wildfires, mass extinction in the natural world. Ecosystems would be disrupted. Coral reefs would bleach out in the oceans. And get this, Jake, low-lying countries such as the Marshall Islands would disappear entirely. Now, politically for the United States, what does this mean? Well, a couple things. One, the United States diplomatic influence wanes. We've already seen China and Russia make statements in the past few hours about how they're willing to step in and fill the void. This could be problematic, Jake, when it comes to other countries looking at us as good partners on the worldwide stage, fighting the war on terrorism, other things. China, of course, is taking the lead. The worst emitter of carbon dioxide right now. They look like they are the ones who are trying to cut back on it. And of course, right now, this is where the big rub is here in the Republican Party. It is going to infuriate American big business. Tesla, Exxon Mobil, Apple, many American companies right now are for the Paris Climate Accord. And of course, Donald Trump pulling out of it is only going to infuriate them. Jake?
All right, Mark Preston, thanks so much. With me now, Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. He supports withdrawing from the Paris climate deal. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. We anticipate that President Trump is going to announce not only that he's withdrawing, but that he does want to have a better climate deal. What might a better climate deal look like?
Well, first, you wouldn't lose 6 million American jobs. I think one of the reasons President Trump was elected is that he promised that he would defend the American worker and defend American jobs. There are estimates that this agreement, which is unfair and punishes America in a much greater fashion than other countries, that we would lose 6.5 million jobs. Meanwhile, countries like India and countries like Iran, we would have to pay them to reduce their carbon emissions. I can't imagine a worse agreement than this thing for the American worker. But I think this is something that President Trump promised the voters. He was going to keep American jobs here, and he wasn't going to sign crazy agreements that don't have our best interest at heart.
Where would these, I don't know what study you're referring to, Senator, where would these 6 million American jobs come from? It seems like a rather dire prediction.
Well, they're in the energy industry. A lot of ours have been lost in Kentucky. We've lost, nearly 90,000 jobs in the coal industry because of excessive regulation. So if America, under this accord, has to reduce her carbon input by 20%, but China doesn't have to reduce their carbon footprint at all, how could that possibly be fair? Who in their right mind would sign something that says China doesn't have to do anything and we have to reduce? When you reduce your carbon footprint, it means you're going to have to reduce your energy output, or you have to convert to other sources, but there may not be enough energy from the other sources. And so then we're talking about going without energy.
How much
jobs
are
related to American jobs.
How much should the U.S. reduce its carbon footprint?
Under the accord, it's about a 20% reduction.
Right, no, but how much do you think it should be?
China doesn't have to reduce it at all.
How much do you think it should be?
Well, I don't know if anybody can tell you right offhand the number. I can say we should try to constrain pollution. We should try to control pollution. And I think we have been doing that for 50 or 60 years. And I think we should continue. But, your previous guest sounded like, my goodness, the sky is falling. Mass extinction? Really? So I don't think we should be alarmist about this. I mean, the planet's 4.5 billion years old. We have gone through great extremes of climate change, natural, and now we may have a man-made influence as well. But these people, the question I always ask these alarmists is, how much is nature and how much is man? They act as if it's a given that man is the only source of climate change. Well, my goodness, the great climate changes in our history all happened before the Industrial Revolution. So is there climate change? Can man have an impact? Yes, but let's don't be so alarmist as to say such outrageous things that if we don't sign the Paris Accords, there's going to be mass extinction. That is a ridiculous statement.
Well, I don't know if it's a direct cause and effect relationship, but obviously scientists, you can go on to the NASA.gov website right now and see what the effects are of man-made climate change. I mean, some of them.
But if you look at the accord, even the intergovernmental committee that promotes all of this, even they say it might be 0.2 degrees over 100 years. And you also need to make sure your viewers know that most of their modeling has been wrong. They readjust their modeling every year because they haven't been very good at predicting things. Predicting the future is notoriously difficult, and this is modeling is not an exact science. It is a science that has variability and probability.
But they have been predicting for years that temperatures would go up, that glaciers would shrink, that sea ice would disappear, that oceans would rise, that the sea level would rise, that there would be longer and more intense heat waves. And all of that has happened, Senator. All of it has happened.
Yeah, but Jake, before man was even on the planet, before we even were burning fires, the oceans were 300 feet shallower. When people walked across from Asia, probably 20, 30,000 years ago, maybe up to 100,000 years ago, the seas were 300 feet shallower. That's why they could walk across the Bering Straits.
Are you really saying that man is not contributing to climate change? I mean, is it? Do you really?
What I'm saying, and this is the big argument that none of you guys get and nobody ever looks at, is how much is nature and how much is man? I'm perfectly willing to admit that man can have an influence and that we should minimize our pollution. But those who say that it is all man and don't acknowledge that the 4.5 billion-year-old planet has gone through massive climate change based on natural effects. I don't know if you completely understand.
It's gone through climate change, absolutely, but not to the degree that we've seen in the last century. And let me just read this. This is from the NASA. Let me read this from the NASA website.
Absolutely incorrect. When you look at climate change, the most dramatic ice ages, the dramatic warming and cooling of the planet all happened before man was even around for the most part.
Okay.
And even when man was here, man was only burning fires. So we've had carbon in the air 600 times what we have now. And so it's gone up and down. And I'm not saying we should forgive and discount pollution, but we should not be so alarmist that we're willing to give up all the American jobs based on computer modeling that has been notoriously inaccurate over the last 15 years. I just want to
read this from the NASA website. The current warming trend is of particular significance because most of it is extremely likely, and they define that as greater than 95% probability, to be the result of human activity since the mid-20th century and proceeding at a rate that is unprecedented over decades to millennia. So you're saying that those...
Why did we change the name?
Those are the NASA scientists.
I know, but why did we change the name from global warming to climate change? Because there's some uncertainty now whether it's getting warmer or colder. And I can tell you, if you look at the details of the modeling and the projections in the last 15 years, they've been altered almost every year because their modeling doesn't add up. All of these people saying we're going to have a 100-foot rise in our seas in the next 100 years, that kind of alarmism is not scientific. And actually, if you read many of the people who do want to control pollution, they will tell you that that's nonsense. And so a 100-foot rise in the seas in 100 years, the seas are 300 feet higher now than they were when man came across the Bering Straits. But that took thousands and thousands of years.
But so I'm just trying to get a straight answer on this question here about whether or not this NASA scientist I just quoted, whether they're wrong.
People who are saying that we're going to have mass extinction are wrong. People who say we're going to have a 100-foot rise in the oceans in the next 100 years are wrong. And the climatologists who have predicted things over the last 15 years have been, on large part, their modeling has been inaccurate and has had to be reformulated because the numbers you put in don't add up to what they're saying is occurring.
I'm not talking about the most dire extreme predictions, but even if there is a rise in the sea level of 5 feet or 10 feet, that can have a huge disruptive effect on.
And I think it's completely unknown whether it'll be 5 inches or 5 feet. And I think until you have evidence that shows that we really are in such alarmist straits.
So wait for it to happen?
No, I think you have to have some evidence, though, and you should base things on evidence. And for the American worker that makes $20,000, $25,000 a year working in the American energy sector, to tell him we're just going to, him or her, that you're not going to have a job and China doesn't have to obey the same rules. The whole reason this Paris Accord should be done is not a debate over global warming or climate change or whatever you want to call it. It should be a debate over whether it's fair. Is it fair for China to keep polluting at alarming rates and for America to be the one cutting back on carbon and China does do nothing? Is it fair that Russia gets to increase their carbon output by 50%? That is not fair to America. It's not fair to the American workers. And I'm betting you that the viewership will say, you know what? America will say, we'd like to have jobs, and we don't want these alarmists who are saying that we're going to have mass extinction. We don't want these people in charge. They were in charge the past 8 years, and they tried to kill most of the jobs in my state. So I think people want jobs and they want a clean environment, but they don't want alarmists in charge who take no account for American jobs.
Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, thank you so much for your time, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's turn to our panel. And Dana, you have some fresh reporting about what President Trump is thinking as he makes this decision. Obviously, we know that there are people on his team, including his daughter Ivanka, including Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who used to work for ExxonMobil, which does not want the U.S. to pull out of this climate change agreement, lobbying for him to stay in it, others lobbying the other way. What is going through the president's mind?
Can I just say before I answer that, I thought that interview was so fascinating and right on, and the fact that you challenged him on some of the climate points. But I think that he articulated some of the arguments that the president and his aides are going to make and want to try to make better than I've heard them make. So that was a fascinating interview. As far as the president goes, I am told that, obviously we know that this has been debated internally for some time, but he has not been movable. And it is because he believes, I'm told by a source who has talked to him, he is 10,000% sure he has to do this. Why? Because he is convinced that that the deal is bad for America, and the U.S. is a laughingstock for participating in agreements like this, which he believes has no efficacy. And he's hoping that by triggering the withdrawal, which takes about 4 or 5 years, that he can then negotiate a better deal. I mean, how Trumpian is that? That he believes that he can negotiate a better deal.
But why is the U.S. a laughingstock? Because the U.S. is the mindset of the Obama administration was that the U.S. over history, cumulatively, is responsible for a majority, not a majority, but a disproportionate percentage of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that have contributed to climate change. Therefore, the U.S. should have it, and also being the wealthiest country in the world, should have a disproportionate role. That's why, in the president's view...
No,
okay.
no, but that appears to be a separate issue. I think from his perspective, the notion of the U.S. being a laughingstock is something that he's actually said. It's been one of the main things he's been consistent on.
About every deal.
About every deal.
Right.
He's written books back when he was contributing to Democrats and talking about how wonderful the Clintons were. He believed this, that the U.S. kept getting into bad deal after bad deal, not just trade agreements, but agreements like this. And when he talks about laughingstock, it's not about the substance of the issue, not about the fact that the U.S. does produce more of the problems than any other country, but it's about the way that historically, not now, right? But it's about the way that this deal was done.
But he felt that way about NAFTA, and he's renegotiating NAFTA. He didn't withdraw from NAFTA. He did withdraw from the TPP, but
Congress had done that already.
But I think with this, correct me if I'm wrong, he has to, the way that the treaty works, he has to pull out before they can start, because it wasn't. It wasn't.
And he had an option to pull out faster, by the way. He
pull out of the Paris Agreement?
He could have pulled out of the UN framework, and that would have allowed him to withdraw faster. Now he can only withdraw in 2020. So this may have been a more moderate option. I mean, I use that term advisedly, but he could have withdrawn sooner.
Jake, I was sitting here with the few hairs I have left on my head.
Where?
There were two, and I pulled them out.
They came out.
I pulled them out listening to Senator Rand Paul. This is what's happening. You have an American president who is now taking a meat axe to the only American industry that is growing. The clean energy sector in America is producing jobs you can laugh. This is not the argument you want to have with me. This is my stuff. Okay. So look, the clean energy sector in this country is growing at 10 times the rest of the economy. You already have more solar workers than you have coal miners. You have more wind energy workers than you have coal miners. You have more Americans working in smart batteries than you have coal miners. This is an American success story that the president is turning his back on. Worse than that, if you say this is a bad deal, what the brilliance of Donald Trump as a business person is hard for me to fathom. But every other business leader in the country says it's a great deal. And I'll tell you why. It's a great deal because you just took 120 countries and you made them into customers for American clean energy companies. If you let those countries go and grow in a carbon consumptive way, you feed the Middle East. If you let those countries grow and they have to rely on clean energy, it comes from the United States and Germany. This is an incredible opportunity for American industry, and the president is against it.
Yeah, the reason I was laughing when you said that is because, look, the fastest growing industry of the last 10 years is not clean energy. It's that we'd have a shale oil and gas revolution that was responsible for the recovery that we had. If we hadn't had shale oil and gas, we wouldn't have had any recovery from the recession at all. It accounted for almost all the net increase. We have 10 million Americans that are employed directly or indirectly by the oil and gas industry.
You want to talk about fracking?
Let me just finish my point. The intent of this deal over time is not just to destroy the coal industry, which Obama did a pretty good job on, but also to destroy the oil and gas industry. And incidentally,
why does BP for it?
Let me make one other point
for it?
about
why
this
is
idea.
Chevron for it?
Let me make one other point. This idea that we've put more carbon in the atmosphere than anyone else. You know why? Because we're the richest country in the world. And you know what? How do you get rich? You use energy. Energy is the master resource. We have more oil, more gas, 500 years worth of coal than any other country in the world. This is so anti-American to basically say we're going to shut down our energy when China is not doing it, India is not doing it.
Why are American energy companies for it then? I'm sorry.
Why are they what?
No. Why are American energy companies for this deal?
Rex Tillerson, too.
Rex Tillerson is for this deal. BP for this
deal. It's a good question, Stephen, because there are but just to bring the wider perspective, it's not just American fuel and petroleum industry companies that are in favor of this. A lot, not all, but a lot of American companies, not manufacturing companies so much, but a lot of American companies are in favor of this deal. Why?
Yeah, I think partly they want to be seen as good, corporate citizens, and they want to, it's a kind of marketing campaign. But the point here is, it is a marketing campaign. But Exxon is going to stop producing oil and gas, right?
No, they're not.
I'm saying they're not going to. But I want everybody on this panel to ask me this question: how in the world is it going to help the global climate situation, even if we shut down all our energy, when China and India are building dozens and dozens of coal plants right now? Don't listen to what they say. Look at what they are doing. They are already completely out of compliance with this deal.
Let's bring in some other people on the panel.
I'm not going to get into that. but what I will say, Dana mentioned one of the reasons he thinks it's a bad deal, and it is true. 100% of Donald Trump's campaign was premised on the idea that, look, these people in office, these politicians, they make bad deals. I'm a businessman, I make good deals. So in a way, this is broadly consistent with what he campaigned on. The other point I would make is, I always come back to this, the Steve Bannon whiteboard. Remember we got a picture of that? Yeah. He writes down, he had a bunch of stuff removed in his office, so he'd have a massive whiteboard and write down all the campaign promises Donald Trump made, which were many. It's a floor-to-ceiling whiteboard. I think Donald Trump, and this was the Bannon argument. Bannon is on the we need to get out of this accord. The Bannon argument is you must make good on your campaign promises. You must do the things you told the people who voted for. Nothing. I'm simply making the point. That's what I think motivates this more than anything else, is this belief that forget what we say. Forget the press about fake news. Forget all that stuff. At the end of the day, the way in which Donald Trump will be judged, both by voters in 2020 and by history more broadly, is he said he was going to do all of those things on the whiteboard. How many of them? Steve Bannon says he puts big X's next to the things he's done.
Well, he just broke a promise an hour ago.
And with the Israel movement. And he has done some of that. But I will say, the story of the first 70 days of the Trump presidency was, wow, he's doing what he said he would do. The travel ban. Whoa, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is, I think, the Bannon influence, which is do what you said you would do.
Do you think it's accurate to say that history will look at this decision by President Trump and judge it in terms of that it was a campaign promise that he fulfilled? Or do you think that there will be, just to be counterintuitive to what you said, Chris, a more broader look at the effects on the environment and the effect on international relations?
Yeah,
I mean, I think it will certainly be looked at perhaps in both contexts, in the context of Trump's presidency, in the context of the Republican Party. I mean, if you think about what Republican presidents have done when they get into office after Democrats, they typically roll back regulations. Ronald Reagan famously ripped the solar panels off of the White House that Jimmy Carter had put in. I mean, this is obviously different. It's monumental. It's this huge agreement between many countries, almost all the countries across the globe. But I do think it's in keeping with Trump's brand to do it in this way. He has told all of his followers that they were losers, that they were been taken advantage of by people in office, by globalists and by the elite. And so I think the fact that he is making such a big deal out of this now is so important. To your point
about checking off the box, I want to, look, Donald Trump was crystal clear in this campaign about what he was going to do. That's right. He was going to promote American energy. He was going to put coal miners back into jobs. Hillary went around the country and said, I'm all in on global warming. My point here is this election was in a large part a referendum on the global climate change agenda. And you know what? The voters rejected it. They rejected it in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania.
I don't want to get into popular vote versus electoral vote, but I do want to go to, I do want, because obviously,
51% of Republicans actually want this deal. Just keep that in mind. 51% of Republicans.
The anti-climate change agenda, anti-climate change combating it agenda won the electoral vote. It did not win the popular vote, and I think that is significant every time that's brought up. But let's go to Fareed Zakaria right now, because I know that there's an international perspective on this that's important.
Jake, I think that it really will, if it proves to be what we think it is, this will be the day that the United States resigned as the leader of the free world. It's nothing short of that. The irresponsibility of this act is breathtaking, because the Paris Climate Accords are actually extraordinarily flexible. They do not dilute American sovereignty. They allow every country to make its own plans. That's why countries that have jealously guarded their sovereignty, like China, like India, like Russia, have all signed on. There are 194 other countries that have signed on to this, including the countries that Donald Trump keeps saying always beat us in these agreements.
Let me interrupt for 1 second, Fareed, just because I want to ask. But what of the point made by Senator Paul and Stephen Moore here on the panel that China is getting away with murder, and don't listen to what the Chinese and the Indians are saying? Look at what they're doing. They're building more polluting plants.
Well, look, under any agreement, there is going to be some cheating. People accuse the United States of undermining the World Trading Organization rules all the time. And there's a process that you put in place to adjudicate this. And when they're found, there can be fines. The argument that generically, that's a reason to never engage in any kind of cooperation. Look, if the Chinese were not signed on to the Paris Accords, they would be polluting many times more. There are also very good studies, one by the Grantham Institute, that points out that China is actually overshooting many of the targets it has arrived at. I also want to point out on this issue of jobs of the future, where I thought Van did an excellent job. The only thing I'd point out is it's 194 countries that are potential markets, not just 125. But the problem with the kind of statistics that Rand Paul and Steve Moore were providing is we all have Google. So from this January's Department of Energy report, United States solar industry employs more workers than coal, oil, and natural gas combined. It grew 25% last year. The point Van was making is exactly right. These are the industries of the future. These are the industries that the United States can dominate. As long as you are engaged in digging up oil, natural gas, that's open to lots of different countries around the world. It's not just the Middle East, it's Venezuela, it's Russia, the country that benefits perhaps most from all this. We would own the future if we could continue to dominate this. So it's bad geopolitically, it's bad economically, it does not dilute American sovereignty. This is a lose-lose-lose for the United States. And as I say, for a young presidency, it is already the single most irresponsible act that this president has taken.
Let me go to Clarissa Ward now, who's covering a lot of the international response to this pending decision. And Clarissa, obviously, only Nicaragua and Syria are the countries that have not signed on to the Paris Agreement as of now. And, Van, as somebody who works on green jobs, let me ask you a question. Why does this have to mean that the U.S. is ceding anything in terms of manufacturing green products or green jobs here and exporting them abroad. We have a private energy sector that is able to do whatever it wants to do.
Well, there's a couple things. First of all, rules matter, market signals matter. I don't think people have understood. We've talked about this so much about, science and climate and polar bears and trees and all that sort of stuff. And in fact, we are in the middle of an extinction event. But let's not talk about that. Let's just talk about how America gets to be great again. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about putting America first. Let's talk about that. This is the way that you do it. You get the rest of the world bought into a carbon-constrained growth strategy, which means you pull the rug out from under the Middle East. And then they say, well, where are we going to get all this clean energy technology? Have you ever heard of Tesla? Have you ever heard of California? I mean, listen, you are literally throwing away customers for American industry. And here's the other thing. You could put the entire Rust Belt back to work. I'm about to cry. Just building the wind turbines to put on barges and send around the world. But we don't want to do that because we've now gotten to this thing where it's tribal. We're no longer looking at actual facts and economics. It's a tribal signal that I'm a good conservative if I poo-poo this stuff. And you got workers sitting there who are Trump voters who could go to work tomorrow if we did this thing. Well, it's terrible.
Let me ask you, do you think that the Democratic Party has failed in explaining?
Yes.
I didn't even finish my sentence. I could talk about the Wonder Woman movie. In explaining to what President Trump on the campaign trail would call the forgotten man and the forgotten woman, the people in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan.
Tragedy right now is that you got this working class base of Trump people who are looking for hope. They're looking for opportunity. How am I going to get a job? And the jobs could come from the wind turbines you build, the solar. Why do you laugh?
But that's the argument that Obama made.
It's the manufacturers, the truckers, the coal miners that are the victims of the climate change agenda. They're the first people who get laid off. It's not university professors or
let me help you. Let me help you. You're just wrong on this. I'm going to help you. Here's your deal. Guess what? It is going to be very important for coal miners to go to work in Appalachia, in particular, if you do this agenda. And I'm going to tell you why. If you're going to build wind turbines, you've got to have enough thermal capacity from your coal to do it. In other words, you can actually, for a long period of time, have coal miners fueling the building of the wind turbines.
Why can't they mine coal? I mean, we have 500 years worth of coal. I mean, why wouldn't we? We have clean coal. We have the cleanest coal in the world. No. We have the technology is incredible. And by the way, you all keep talking about clean energy. We have a clean energy. It's called natural gas. It's the reason the United States has reduced its carbon emissions more than any other country.
Let's talk about that.
So are you including natural gas?
Here's what I love. You guys can't have it both ways, sir. Do you like fracking and natural gas, or do you like coal? Because the reason...
I think we should do both.
But natural gas is putting the coal industry out of business.
This is the sort of nonsense that they got away with the whole campaign. You cannot be for fracking, which is drop the price of natural gas below coal and put a bunch of coal miners out of work, say you want more fracking and more coal. That's like saying you want more water and more fire in the same thing.
Wait a minute. You're right that the low natural gas prices really hurt the coal industry. You know what else it's killing? It's killing the wind industry. Well, wind is five times more expensive than natural gas. I mean, literally 5 times more expensive per kilowatt hour. Why would we use a highly inefficient form of energy? And by the way, we have another one, nuclear power. I don't see any of your friends on the left talking about nuclear power. And nuclear power emits no carbon emissions.
But can I just say, I don't have an answer to the question of why withdrawing from this treaty means that the United States private sector will lose out on a whole bunch of jobs.
I'll tell you this. You will have 4 things that happen. States, cities, tribes, and some industries will try to push forward anyway. What matters, though, is if you have a clear market signal that if you're going to build out your energy sector around the world, or if you're going to build out your energy sector in the United States, that you're going to have to do it in a carbon-constrained way. That gives you a more solid target in the market.
What other industry has that? What other industry in the world has that kind of market signal that mandates people to use it?
Wait, hold on a second. You just said, and the only thing I agree with you so far all day, sir, is that energy is special. Right. Energy is the most important contributor to any economy. And so how you do energy is a matter not just of markets, but also of policy. And the policy signals matter. What you're going to do now is you're creating, Jake, uncertainty in the clean energy market. That freezes up innovation, that freezes up capital, and it costs you jobs.
But if 194 countries are still part of this. And China's going to take advantage of it. Why can the United States not still take advantage of it?
That's the great danger. He is rolling the dice. I don't know if he knows that he's doing this. He is rolling the dice. If the dominoes start to fall, in other words, if
other countries pull out.
Because you also need government investment, right, in these sort of new technologies to get them off the ground. And that's probably not going to happen.
The government didn't do the shale, the fracking. No, they didn't. They did the horizontal drilling. That was all done by wildcatters who went out there and figured it out. That is not true.
It was not done by government.
I want to bring Fareed. Fareed's at a disadvantage because he's not here to jump in, but I know he's raising his hand. Fareed, jump in.
Sure. What I wanted to say, Jake, is that let's be honest. What we are saying is that clean energy does require government subsidies right now, in that it is not different from any infant industry of importance. Give you an example. The United States now dominates the computer industry, the internet, the whole information age. Do you know why? Because in the 1950s, the government of the United States bought more than half of all computer chips produced. They were bought at exorbitant costs, made no sense commercially to produce them, and the United States, the Defense Department basically, and then NASA just bought these things at, then they started to buy the mainframe computers up to the point where the costs go down. That is what is happening in clean technology. That's what Germany does. That's what China does, because they see that the future is going to be a land of clean energy, and they want to dominate it. So just as the United States did with many technologies in the past, which produced the internet, which produced GPS, and produced every leading technology company of today, the United States has to provide some market signals. And if you take away the Paris Accords, you take away that surety. That is the danger here. Somebody is going to dominate these clean energy sectors. They will get some nascent government support. I'd rather it be here than China.
Fareed, I love you, but I've got to say, I mean, it's comical to say that the wind industry is an infant industry. We've had windmills for 1,000 years. I mean, come on, this is no infant industry.
That's your argument, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, we've had
That's your argument?
There's a reason people stopped using windmills 250 years ago and used fossil fuels, because fossil fuels are a much,
and there was
and
Steve, there was an abacus in China 2,000 years ago. The wind industry today is slightly different from the wind industry you're talking about in Holland 1,000 years ago.
Can I say something?
If you can't see that, I don't know where to begin.
Gloria?
Well, I'm going to defer to Van because he's really eager here, and then I'll go.
But, okay, so here's the thing. A couple of things. First of all, the fracking revolution, which is an extraordinary revolution, all of that R&D was done on the government dime. That is true. Also, when you're talking about the windmills versus wind turbines are Boeing-level engineering. It's like a jet engine in the sky.
It's not what you see in Amsterdam.
It's not what you see in Amsterdam. And so again, when you have all this mythology out there, and what's so great about that? Who can make that stuff? American workers can make that stuff. And so what I am desperate about is I think that the Democrats and the environmentalists have done a horrible job of making the economic case on this stuff. And as a result, then it's going to cost 6 million jobs. That is complete hocus. Well, that study has been disproven 1 million times, but they believe it because they never hear us talking about the work and the wealth and the health benefits of a green energy economy. The jobs of the future we're throwing away today. And it's not just a tweet. It's an action from the president.
So can I just take a step back for a moment? I know you guys don't want to do that, but I think the treaty itself sent a signal worldwide that it's time to clean up. We've all got to do this. It's time to clean up. And I think by the United States withdrawing, and again, I would point out, this is not until 2020. It is actually a day after the next presidential election that this would take effect. Not a small point. But that this is a signal, us withdrawing and becoming along with Nicaragua, which didn't think this treaty went far enough, and Syria, which is in the middle of a civil war, with the United States now saying, okay, we're with them. I think it is not a good signal to the rest of the world. And I would also say politically, to my political colleagues
Vice
here,
President Pence, I'm going to break away just so we cover. Vice President Pence is out there talking at the Rose Garden. Let's listen in.
Members of Congress, distinguished guests, on behalf of the First Family, welcome to the White House.